Hello, hello. We'll just give it a few minutes to let folks trickle on in. Hi, welcome. If you can, let us know in the chat where you're tuning in from. Always love to know where our audience is from. Hello from New Jersey. Hey, I'm from New
I
Jersey.
can fit this up.
Amazing. East Coast representation. Let's
I'm
go.
I'm from Maryland. Our CEO
Oh,
is from
you
New Jersey
are.
too. Yeah, Marine's from
Amazing.
New Jersey. So
Nice, nice. Larry, how long have you been out there in the Bay Area?
uh a long time. So over 30 years now. So
Wow, 30 years.
yeah.
All right.
So longer than I've spent on the East Coast by a long mile.
Hello from Washington State. Good afternoon. Tennessee. All right. Oh, hi, Lynn. Lynn was a volunteer for us at this past weekend's BRIC Summit. So,
Nice.
hello. Amazing. All right. Well, we're about a few minutes in, so I'll go ahead and get this intro started. But thanks everyone for tuning in to BRIC's Animation, Visual Effects, and Gaming Pre-Apprenticeship Speaker Series. That's a mouthful. My name is Sarah. I'm BRIC's Director of Communications and your moderator. And this speaker series from the BRIC Foundation aims to give you an inside look at all of the careers and inner workings of the animation, visual effects, and gaming industries. Today, we're giving you an inside look at indie animation development, and I'm very excited to welcome today's guest, Larry Cutler, who is the co-founder and chief technology officer of Baobab Studios. We'll hear from Larry about his career journey and the development process at Baobab Studios, which is a 10-time Emmy Award-winning leading independent animation studio. And then towards the last 15 minutes of the session, we'll host a live Q&A. So definitely make sure to use that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. It might be hidden under the More button on the right to submit any questions you might have for Larry along the way. So with that, Larry, I'll pass it over to you to take over.
All right. Thanks so much, Sarah. And first of all, thank all of you for attending this. I'm It's very exciting to be talking to I think mostly high school students. I have two daughters who are in high school in San Francisco, and um, and so I know how important it is to get to see different perspectives and different career choices that people have made. And so I'm really excited to give you hopefully a little bit of a behind the scenes peek at how we create animated both films and animated interactive experiences today. You could think of this as like kind of animation filmmaking 101. And I co-founded Baobab Studios, as Sarah said, almost 10 years ago. And my chief creative officer and my partner was Eric Darnell, who is the writer and director of all of the four Madagascar movies, as well as Ants at DreamWorks. That's where I met Eric. And I've spent a long time in feature film production myself, on working on the Shrek films and How to Train Your Dragon. And before that, I was at Pixar in the early days as a technical director on A Bug's Life, Monsters Inc., Toy Story 2, some of the early films. And so we started Baobab with the idea of really creating franchises of stories and characters, but really focused on sort of um, more up and coming platforms such as virtual reality. And so today I'm going to highlight some of the franchises that we've been building initially for VR, but we've also expanded into creating games on Roblox and Fortnite, as well as creating TV shows and feature films that we're developing, sort of more traditionally. And we have a few TV shows that are in production right now or in development with Disney Plus. So before I do that, start by just playing you a little bit of an animation reel of some of the work that we've done at Baobab.
So why'd you create Baobab Studios?
It's to bring me back to that 5-year-old sense of self. You know, when you were 5 and you thought you could do anything, you could be an astronaut, athlete, singer, songwriter, but something happens when you grow older. A lot of us lose our dreams. That's why we go to the movies and why we play games. It's to experience worlds and characters beyond those we experience in our everyday lives. I still believe there is a dreamer in us all.
All right. What's actually really interesting about this is that almost all of the animation that you saw in that video was actually created in a real-time game engine, and most of it was actually rendered in VR, meaning that it was actually playing 72 frames a second, one in each eye. And so the constraints of that are very different from what I have done and what Eric has done in our previous lives on feature films, where we would actually send off, you know, a seat or a shot to a render farm that would be like hundreds of fancy machines that would render images in maybe an hour or two for an easy shot, and up to 24 hours or even longer for a really complicated shot with lots of effects and lots of craziness going on and complexity. So um, with that, I'm gonna kind of mix conversation about the world of TV and film, as well as the world of interactive narratives for virtual reality. And so I just wanted to start, first of all, VR is where right now, at least, eventually it'll be like you wear some glasses, and but basically it's where we place you directly inside the story. And that's really the power of storytelling in VR, is that you're connected to the world around you. So you're not actually looking, through a screen at characters. You're actually in the world. You're part of the world. And you're immersed because you can really look out anywhere. And so we can actually make these worlds so amazing and coming to life that it almost feels like you can reach out and touch them. And what's even cooler is we can give you a role to play in, so that means that you can be inspired to act if you choose to. We can actually make you an important part or a hero character in the story. And what's even cooler is that characters can actually acknowledge you in real time because they can respond to what you're doing, and you can develop a relationship with the characters. And because of that, it allows us to make you matter. Oops. Uh-oh, now we got to go through this. Nope. Okay, I'm just going to keep emphasizing making you matter. But that really is one of the things that's differentiated the work that we've done at Baobab from, other studios like, Pixar or DreamWorks where we've worked in the past, is that interactivity of you being part of the story is really special. And it really has shaped, even when we work on more passive experiences like TV shows, how we think about them. So to date, we've actually created uh, nine different stories and characters, many of them for VR. For most of these experiences, we've created 2D films to go along with them. And then a number of them were actually or in the process of either turning them into games as well as to TV shows or films. And we also have a number of deals for creating books and graphic novels. And in fact, we just released our first middle grade book called The Magic Paintbrush last year. That's based off of ancient Chinese sort of tale of a paintbrush that when you draw it with the right person comes to life. All right. The other thing that's really cool is that we get to work with really famous talent and amazing actors and actresses. And as an independent film studio, we basically can choose not just the stories that we create, but we can actually be able to have access to actors that you wouldn't expect, whether that's Oprah Winfrey or John Legend, um, or Daisy Ridley, Kate Winslet. They've all come and worked on our projects, and we can't pay them a lot of money. We're a small studio, an independent studio, but they have joined us because they actually believe in our team, and more importantly, they believe in the stories that we're creating, and we're able to tell them through a different lens. All right. So today, just diving in is really, as I said, going to be about walking through the animation process. And this is a little bit of like the animation filmmaking 101. And hopefully this just gives you a taste, not just of our process, but also all of the types of people that are involved in creating an animated show that you might see, or one of our VR experiences. So the very beginning of this is that you start out with a story and an idea, and one of the first things that you do is you turn that into a script. And so what's been great in our early days, Eric, our chief creative officer, he has an incredible number of ideas, and he's a writer. So with everything that he does, he's always going from idea to page very quickly. And oftentimes we work with a lot of amazing directors and creators, and sometimes creators can also be much more visual thinkers. And so sometimes we'll often pair a director with a writer early on, so that the creator can actually have a writer who's help giving real really a solid spine, and really dive into the characters more fully than you would otherwise. And so the script is super, super important. And we iterate on the script, we revise the script over many revisions. And one of the interesting things when you think of an immersive form or a game is that story also, we have the opportunity for you to have a role in that. And so this is actually our first project we created, which was Invasion. And the idea of Invasion is that it's basically there's aliens who try to take over Earth, but they're not thwarted by like, humans with guns or military. They're thwarted by this cute little bunny named Chloe. And so in this shot, you're going to see that Chloe hops up to you, and you look down, and you're actually a bunny as well. And you have a little bunny body. If you hop around, your belly compresses. And once we actually made you a bunny in this project, suddenly like it grounded you in a way that wasn't there before. And even though this was super simple, like at the time there was no hand controllers or interactivity, it really highlighted to us the power of you not just being passive, but you having an active role. And we've really been exploring that with each of our VR projects. So when we're doing the script writing, we have to, if it's an immersive project or a game project, we have to really think about that from the get-go, is not just what are the other people in the story, but what's your role too. As we're doing that script design, we very quickly want to actually dive into who these characters are, what's the world that they live in. And so we bring on amazing artists and especially character designers to start fleshing out the characters. So I'm going to use Baba Yaga as which is one of our projects, as kind of an example to walk you through a number of these steps. And so Baba Yaga is a kind of Russian Eastern European character and set of tales about a witch that rides on a mortar and has a pestle, and in many of the stories, basically eats little children. So actually, very bad, evil witch. And Eric really loved the kind of range of stories that were told of Baba Yaga, and what really interested him in this project and this character was that there were so many different variations on that. And so while many of them Baba Yaga was actually evil, in a number Baba Yaga was actually much more like transactional. Like, you do something for me, I'll do something for you. And and then in a number of stories, Baba Yaga was actually an agent of good. And so Eric's kind of hook into our story was what if Baba Yaga isn't a character, but Baba Yaga is a role? And so we actually sort of visualize that through a mask. And so basically, whoever has the mask and puts it on becomes Baba Yaga. And then it's really what they do with that power that's important. And so with that, I'm going to just play a short video that kind of highlights some of the interesting aspects of Baba Yaga.
Baba Yaga is an animated story about two children who risk their lives to save their mother by entering a magical forest ruled by the witch Baba Yaga. And we've innovated by making you, the viewer, the main character of the adventure, ensuring that your choices change the story in dramatic ways. Baba Yaga also innovates with its unique handcrafted art style, along with expressive and nuanced character animation, all running in a real-time game engine. I think with Baba Yaga, it's been a progression in terms of how we situate the viewer and what the relationship is to the story and the characters. And so each time we've done it, we've taken it another step forward. And I think Baba is kind of the next step for us in terms of interactivity and, most importantly, making sure that the viewer feels like they matter.
When you're stepping into the world of Baba Yaga, you should feel like you're stepping into a giant pop-up book.
Baba Yaga is one of the most feared witches of Eastern European folklore. She's often described as a dark lady of magic. So in our reimagining, Baba Yaga doesn't just live in the forest, she's actually the keeper of nature. And she uses her power to do anything she can to protect the forest from the encroachment of humankind.
Time to pay for your selfish ways.
Your ways are no better. You wage war on us and the forest still dies.
The forest is very present. That's what I mean. Like, it speaks its personality. It's aware of everything that's going on and what's happening to it and how it needs help.
They're just trees, Sasha. They can't hurt us.
Hurt you? Well, that's a twist.
You think the jungle's been chopping down villages all of this time?
And based off of the choices that you make, humanity and nature can either live in harmony or they can't live in balance, and it has to be one that wins over the other.
We make you matter by giving your character choices that have meaningful consequences. You can choose to take that mask, put it on, and become Baba Yaga.
Sasha, you don't have to do this. It's my fault we're in this mess. Mother needs you.
If you do choose to become Baba, you get to decide whether to share your powers with the villagers or rule as an even more powerful Baba Yaga. Interactivity and character AI also make you bond with the other characters. So utilizing the power of our storyteller platform, we can render feature film quality character performances in real-time VR at 72 frames a second.
Having that level of nuance can just be so meaningful. You know, animation is this much about the action and this much about intention, right? It's all about what's happening in a character's head. What are they thinking?
In Baba Yaga, I believe that we take it to the next level, where the choices that you make have a profound impact on the ending, where we can inspire you to dream, bring out your sense of wonder, and make you matter.
All right. So first of all, I should say this was an amazing all-female cast of Glenn Close, Daisy Ridley, Jennifer Hudson, and Kate Winslet as Baba Yaga. And we actually have taken that Baba Yaga story, and we are working with Disney Plus to actually turn that into a TV series where we're going to have different witches not just Baba Yaga, from different times and different cultures that come together to actually fight one big evil villain that wants to, take all of their powers and all of witches' powers around the world for his own benefit. All right, so character design is where we're actually like, we got this Baba Yaga story, we've got this character Baba Yaga, and a character designer will come in and they'll start fleshing out the design. So this is actually the final design for Baba Yaga in our Baba Yaga story. These are some early designs. I'm just going to show you a lot of different designs. And one of the things that's interesting is we immediately decided with Baba Yaga that instead of it being in kind of like a Russian Eastern European, we wanted to like take it out of there and make it our own. And originally we wanted it on an island, but we had the island very specifically in kind of like the Caribbean. And so you're going to see a lot of like Caribbean influences early on. We eventually got moved away from that and made the island more more nondescript, so it's unclear where the island exists. But you'll see that in some of the other characters. Magda is our hero character. And so these are the character designs for Magda. It's also very common that as we do character design, we'll work on different expressions because all of those need to actually translate into us creating what's called a rig, which is basically like a 3D puppet that we create so that animators can actually animate the character in any pose and make the character come to life. And then these are some early poses. Again, you're seeing kind of like Caribbean influences initially. At the same time that we're doing character design, we start on concept artwork. So this is kind of like, what's the visuals? What is the world going to look like? And this is probably the earliest piece of artwork that we did on Baba Yaga, which was a full like probably 2 years before we actually started to really dive into it when it was just an early concept. You'll notice here that the other fun aspect of Baba Yaga is that her house rides around on its has chicken legs, so it's basically a house on top of chicken legs that move around. This is some early artwork for one of our co-directors mentioned this in the video, that we really wanted it to feel like a pop-up book, but in VR, like in 3D. And so this is some early concept for the beginning and the ending are all done as pop-up cards, sort of pop-up geometry. This is some early design for the forest. And then we start diving into the individual sets that you're in. So this is the chief's bedroom, more details on the forest, inside Baba Yaga's hut, which we ended up doing as kind of a seashell. And again, that's because we wanted it to have that we were on an island. And then this is an example of how that prologue where it's a pop-up book is going to look like. All right, so we have this story in the script. Probably the most important part of the process is how we actually flesh out the story visually. And so storyboards are where we actually take a scene and a storyboard artist will actually draw, you can think of them as like thumbnail sketches, often really rough, and we'll draw it like one for every second of the story. We'll actually cut that together in a video, an animatic. We'll actually record actors. Oftentimes very early on, the actors are scratch actors. They're usually people in the office, your friends, and then eventually we'll bring on the real talent and cut them in. And so the whole idea is that you get a sense of the timing, the pace, what's working, what's funny in a way that is really hard to do just looking at the script. And we'll iterate on these storyboards repeatedly. And so in fact, in a feature film might actually have like 4 or 5 year lifetime between when it's in early development and when it gets released. It takes a long time to create a film. And we'll actually have storyboards of it from very early on, and those storyboards will just be updated and iterated on and iterated on. And I think I can't remember what the exact number is, but it's something like for every, like every second you see, every storyboard that's in the final story cut in a film, you might have iterated on that like 20 times. So because this is really cheap to actually iterate on this, as opposed to once you get into the animation production and the lighting and all of the things that are much more expensive on the computer. And so, by the way, these storyboards are from another project of ours called Bonfire, which is where you're crash landed on an alien planet, and you actually need to befriend the creatures on the planet. In this case, it's this alien pork bun who kind of views you as the alien on the planet. Okay, so that all of that process is pretty much what you would have whether you have a passive project like a TV show or film, um, or an interactive narrative project like our VR projects. Where this differs is that once you have something that's interactive, then that means that you actually need interactive design of how you're going to interact with the characters in the world. And so that means that we're bringing together a lot more types of engineers and artists that you would see in game development. So that means that we're bringing on game designers, level designers, and interactivity engineers to flesh out what's usually called the core loop, which is basically the what you're doing, like minute to minute, hour to hour, day to day, and especially the core mechanic, like how do you interact? And the core mechanic is especially important in VR, where you have a much more natural interfaces. The other thing that this brings up is that once you have something where you can interact with things and you can interact with the characters, and so it's a dynamic scene and a dynamic story, it's no longer linear. So you need AI to actually bring all this together. And I'm just going to give you a simple example. This is from this Project Bonfire. And this is actually the first line of dialogue where you've crash landed and you're injured. So you're sitting there, and this is your helper robot. And let's watch what happens.
Scout E17. Hey, I'm talking here. Oh, if you'd let me finish. Oh. You do realize that I'm programmed to feel pain, right? Oh.
So what you can see here is that she's delivering her first line of dialogue, and it's like, well, what happens if I have a log and I could place the log in the fire, and now I have a flaming log, and then I throw it at this robot? What happens? Well, the robot better respond. It better actually get more and more frustrated with you. And so how you actually like encode that is very nonlinear. So you couldn't just do that with sort of straight ahead animation. So the way that we've decided to do this is that we've taken a page from stand-up comedy, where stand-up comedians, believe it or not, they actually don't just get up and tell a bunch of jokes and puff it on the fly, although it often seems that way. They actually break things down they have a big set, and they break that down into logical pieces that they call chunks. And then within those chunks, they break them up into bits. And so a bit is an individual joke. And what happens is that stand-up comedians, they actually can change around their set. Their bits can be reordered, their chunks can be reordered, they can skip things based off of audience participation and audience feedback. And that's kind of what's going on here. So we take our script and we can actually break that down into chunks and bits. And then furthermore, we can have AI systems that are actually helping to manipulate this. And so that translates into interactive design, and it translates into a way that we can encode things in our tools, our storyteller tool set. So this is just a simple example of the character Magda actually handing you a lantern, which is very symbolic of you joining her on the journey. And you could see on the left is kind of like the chunks and bits that are going. And this seems really simple, right? Like you have a character and you're handing her a lantern, but it's actually really complicated because you could be anywhere in the scene. Magda has to find you. What happens if you don't take the lantern? What happens if you take it with a different hand? There's a lot of complexity, even something as simple as this. All right. So now that we've put in all these potential pieces, we're going to start getting into the nitty gritty of production. And so production, first of all, is taking those storyboards. So, we eventually have an animatic that we like, and then translating that into a CG world. And which has in a film has a camera that's locked in. The difference in a VR project is you are the camera, so you could be anywhere. So the previs has to be much more robust because you're not telling a story from a specific camera's point of view. So this is a previs scene from a project that we did called Crow the Legend, which was based off of a Native American folktale and starred John Legend as the title character. And so what you're going to see is in the upper right is the storyboards, and then you're going to see the previs which is this not final animation. The idea is to really to bring that world together so that we can actually do the rest of the project.
I am so cold. Look, what's that?
Yeah. Hey, everybody, look at me. I did not fly into the sun.
And so another thing you'll notice is that there's scratch dialogue here, like that's
Whoa,
Eric.
hey, now
doing
that
scratch.
is a fire, huh?
What were you thinking?
Oh man, you should have seen Crow.
All right, I'm gonna move ahead here. So previs becomes more complicated in stories that have a lot of interactivity, and so that bonfire scene, kind of like a core scene, is how you interact with the character. And so we've tried lots of different experiments on this too. That's one of the fun things about our company is that we actually treat each project that we do as an experiment. And in this case, we actually did our storyboards in VR. So we actually drew the storyboards in VR. It turns out that was really, really hard. And then we also kind of layered in interactivity. So this is a user test that we did kind of in this previs stage that was combining VR storyboards and with some set with actually a early version of an interactive character. So the next phase is that just looking at it more holistically, like we have the previs for a given scene, we're actually going to build towards what in game world is called a vertical slice. And that's in games, it's where you take one level and you take it all the way to completion. And the idea is that at the end of that, you actually know that what it would take to create the rest of the levels, and you've kind of solved all the difficult problems, and you have a much better understanding of, time frame, expense, and that vertical slice is a showcase that you can show off. And so we've done the same thing with our projects as well. So this is a vertical slice of one of the key scenes from that project Bonfire. And there's this little pork bun alien that you actually need to befriend. And one of the ways you do that is you can throw these compact nourishment cylinders that look a lot like marshmallows. Now, I should say, in practice, this was the hardest scene to do. So we actually never finished this vertical slice until like the last day of production. So sometimes it doesn't work out as planned. So the next phase is animation. And, obviously what brings these stories to life are animators. And in this case, one of the things that was fun is that we actually had a 2D animator that started doing 2D animations of that pork bun character before we had done any character modeling or rigging. And so we were able to first flesh out that character looks great. We were flesh out performance issues in 2D before we really dived into the three-dimensional model and rig and animation process. And then we'll often, as we create character rigs so that the character can move and can emote, then the animators will take that and they'll really do performance tests and sort of push the performance for given characters. And we put all that together, and then this is going back to Baba Yaga. This is actually the final animation for one of the shots in Baba Yaga, and it's a really nice piece of animation. All right. And then once we have the animation, the next part is adding in the lighting and effects and everything that make it really fit into the world. And this is also an area that's very different between a film where you can have incredibly complex ray traced worlds of physically based renders that can take many hours to render versus real-time games and real-time VR, where everything that casts just a shadow is super expensive. And so you have to be very clever with the amount of render budget, because for a VR experience, you're running everything at 72 frames a second, which means you have something like 10, 15 milliseconds to render one one frame. And so this is the same scene with audio, with lighting, and with effects. And again, this was all taken from a VR headset, circa 3 years ago.
Did you follow me?
I refuse to go back until I find that witch blossom. So you can just return to the village on your own. Or you can carry the lantern and come with me. Thank you. We've got to get out of here.
This is a couple of other additional scenes.
Here she comes!
Do you know the punishment for thievery?
Become the witch. Now go. Run as fast as you can.
Hey, Laura. You go another one, please. Thank. Okay. So another thing that's fun is that as I said, we're often creating 2D films from our VR projects. And so this actually highlights the power of using immersive technologies in the filmmaking process. And so here we actually wrote a tool set that allows us to be able to have our director, Eric, use VR to actually shoot cameras for the entire film. And he ended up being our cinematographer for the 2D version of Baba Yaga. There we go. So you can see there's Eric at home during COVID too. And this is what he's seeing in the headset, and then this is the final shot. And so it's just a really good example of the power of being able to use use VR as a tool making thing, which I think a lot of people have done since. And then this is just a little snippet from one of our more recent projects, Namu, which is a tree in Korean, and we partnered with a Korean filmmaker, Eric O. And this is kind of like a story about paying a homage to his grandfather, and covers someone's life from birth to death as sort of exemplified through this tree. And the reason I wanted to show you this project was actually shortlisted for the Oscar for Best Animated Short. But what was really interesting about this is everything you saw there was actually all hand drawn in VR. So it's basically using a VR animation tool to actually create all of that, which is incredibly unbelievable to think about. So with that, I hope that gives you kind of a taste of the filmmaking process that we go through. And I just want to end by saying, by leaving you with a Lakota blessing. This is something we learned from our project Crow the Legend, where we partnered with different Native American communities, and because we were retelling a Native American story that hadn't been told. And so the Lakota blessing of Metakue Oyasin means that we are all connected, we're all one, and it's something that's spoken at the beginning of any ceremony and at the end. And I think that's actually a great moniker for not just life itself, which is important nowadays, but it is also a great moniker for the promise of immersive storytelling, where we really are, we allow you to be connected to the world around you and to the characters, and we give you the opportunity to be an important part of the story. So with that, um, I will stop sharing, and I'm really excited to answer any questions that you may have. I think we have about 20 minutes for questions.
Thanks so much, Larry. And I love that ending note.
Yes, I do too. It really was both impactful and inspiring to work on that project.
Amazing. Folks, just a reminder, feel free to use that Q&A function in the bottom of your window to submit any questions you have for Larry. But Larry, that was so cool to see kind of like the hybrid pipeline that you all have developed that blends traditional with CG animation and gaming and all of that fun stuff. It was very unique to see that process at Baobab.
Yes, yeah, no, it's I think we naively started our company just feeling like, oh, we could take our knowledge of how to create, animations and just make it like 360. And what we were very humbled very quickly that this was just such a different world, both the interactivity that everyone, like takes for granted in games where like you could have you're participating, you're actively, like driving everything, is so powerful. And combining that with VR where and a great story where we can make you part of it, and there's an aspect of real life that's woven into that as well.
Yeah, it
So
was very cool to see those interactive design elements woven in.
mhm.
We have a question from Ivan who asks, is VR content still sought after?
It's an excellent question. We for us, we've always viewed what we are creating as having franchises, and so VR was a way for us to actually differentiate ourselves and just be uh, blown away by what's possible there. The answer is still yes and no, in the sense of the VR community is still very strong and fervent, but I won't lie, it hasn't grown in the way that, like it's just taking a long time for it to become mainstream. And we're super excited for that to happen. But it still has a ways to go there as well. So,
I'm curious to know, since it's evolving tech, right? And
mhm,
it's
yes.
still evolving. What are some of those changes that you've seen across your career and where do you see it going?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because even just going from when we started our company, the in 2015, we basically carried around these huge computers, and our headsets were tethered to them, and we had all these sensors. So you would, in some cases, have stands with a sensor on it just so that they could track your head and your hands. And it was not at all for the faint of heart and certainly not consumer ready. And then once the Quest came along, which basically like allowed you to not need all these computer and sensors, that completely changed the possibilities of VR, to be much more consumer facing and more mainstream. Um, and obviously what's happened now is first of all, the form factor really does need to reduce down. I think everyone would like to get to the point where it's as unobtrusive as being your glasses, but we still have a ways to go on that. Um, and we've gone from needing, like hand controllers to being able to track your hands, and also being able to have compelling interactions that are not just VR where we're completely immersing you, but are MR where we're combining virtual elements into your real world. I think those are all like super exciting. I think obviously the thing everyone's really focused on right now, which we've been grappling with in all of our projects, is the AI component, where obviously over the last few years, the generative AI possibilities, um, you know, huge, profound impact for lots of things. But, the characters that we've created here, we really put a lot of time into creating AI driven characters. And technologies that support that. But one of the hardest things to do was to really have characters that can meaningfully like have conversations with you and, like take that to another level. And so when we've had kind of like Pork Bun as an example of a character that really is responsive to you, but Pork Bun can't talk. And there's a reason for that. That was one of the first things that Eric asked us on the project was, oh, can we have Pork Bun like, like repeat back what you're saying and, like more traditional dialect, even if it was its own dialect. And we quickly came to the conclusion that no, we couldn't do anything. It was too hard. And
So that was a limitation of technology
totally
then.
a limitation of technology that now, I think it opens up a huge new possibilities for much more believable character AI, but that's hopefully combining what you're seeing in chat, which isn't the most interesting, use of it with real animated characters that that are like that that pork bun character in some ways was probably the hardest character we worked on because it it was completely AI driven, but at the same time, it had to behave like the character Pork Bun. And so when we'd show stuff in dailies, Eric is thinking about it from an animator and storyteller's lens. And he's like, it doesn't look like Pork Bun. It's okay that he moves from one position to another, but it looks super mechanical and it's not, and so we really had to kind of combine the animation artistry with the AI systems we were building. But I think that like the generative AI stuff is really going to fundamentally change what's possible in VR, and then obviously in games and and other mediums as well. So
Interesting. Well, speaking of the tech, Mary asked in the chat, what were some of the tools used in VR to animate? Are you able to share what kind of
yeah, definitely.
software you use?
We, I mean, all of this is done in real-time game engines. We've worked with both Unreal and Unity. Most of these projects that you saw were actually done in Unity. And so we did all of our core animation in Maya, so you could think of like Maya, Blender. And then we imported that into Unity. We did have a lot of, we built a whole platform on top of Unity that we called our storyteller platform. And a big part of that was character technology so that we weren't as limited by, like kind of the character rigs and the animation quality that you would typically get in a game. So we sort of put that in, but there was over time a whole sort of tool set and workflow in every part of the filmmaking process, from the lighting side, we had tools to the layout side, to the camera work, for creating the 2D film. But then from Unity both Unity and Unreal have then plugins to be able to put that into to the different headsets.
Great. All right. We have Talia who asks, what advice do you have for independent animation creators?
Well, one piece of advice is to just actually go out and do it. So like I think I'm going to channel Eric does a good job of talking about this as a animation person, which is that like in certain fields, like if you wanted to be a doctor, you can't just go out and perform heart surgery right now. You have to go through a bunch of training and you have to, obviously it's a many year process. And then you go to medical school and you become a resident. And and so, but in terms of being able to make your own short, to do your own project, to tell your own story, you could do that right now, in the same way as an artist. You may not do a great job at first. It's going to take a ton of, of doing it repeatedly, but it's something you could do right now. And in many ways, there's never been a better time to do it. When I started working, um, to work on, let's say, like an animated film or or CG project, you needed really fancy hardware. So like the machines we used were like $20,000 SGI computers, and you needed really fancy software. And almost all of the animation pipelines were all internally built. So each, company would build their own thing. And now you have Unity and Unreal, which are basically free that you could use. You have Blender, which is free. So you have not just the ability to on sort of commodity hardware to be able to create these, but you have all these tools that are and pipelines that are free that are super extensible. So there's never been a better time to actually just get out there and do it. And so I think that's always what we're looking for, is people who take that initiative and create things. I think that's one thing that like at Baobab that we all have in common is that we're no matter what, like from our hardcore engineers to our artists, everyone is a storyteller in some way or another. So like there's secretly somewhere everyone wants to tell stories or be part of that storytelling process. And so I would just say go for it. Basically like don't think you can't do it, or that you need a bunch of experience to be able to do that. And that's one of the really cool things about the kind of tool sets available right now.
Love that. And I feel like that go-getter attitude to create is very much at the center of Baobab's culture. Just recalling the beginning of your presentation too. All right, we have Lynn who asks, since you mentioned how you guys were humbled and struggled initially, how have you measured your studio's improvement and progress? Do you have advice for how to give yourself the space to make mistakes without losing out on opportunities? It's a good
No,
question.
that is a great question. Like we do view each of our projects as experiments. And so obviously like you hear a lot of cliches almost about, like entrepreneurship is about failing fast. But it really is true that the only way you learn is through experimentation and failure. I've actually given a talk on failure, where I basically looked at all the different failures we've had at different points in our company, because everyone always talks about how great everything is and all their successes, and you only see like the end results. So I do think that's important. And then the key is to be able to, one, be able to, like, for example, we do a ton of user testing so that we can actually like evaluate and know where we failed. And not just, I think one of the things that's easy is, as a team, you look at stuff and you assess whether something's working or something's not working. And then oftentimes, because you're so immersed in what you're doing, that you kind of lose perspective. You're too involved. And so you actually need someone from the outside, or someone who's not familiar, to actually like look at what you're doing. And so then it becomes, how do you, as early as possible, like figure out whether, like how to assess failure and then be able to adjust. And so the more you do that up front, then it's actually great and you can learn from it. And what gets really hard, and this does happen too, is you get really far along in the process and then you actually realize that what you have is not working. And so that's actually where it gets really expensive and really painful. But that does happen too. And so then you have to have the mindset of, for us, one way we measure, there's many ways you can measure success, but one way that has evolved is we spent a lot of time at first kind of arguing about what is the quality bar for any project. And and over time it kind of became clear from our previous projects. And so if something's not at that quality bar, even if it's really late, we've often made difficult decisions to spend more money, to delay things, or in some cases to be like, hey, this is not good enough and it's not going to be good enough. And so like we need to actually like put the whole thing on hold and really reassess where we're at, and either scrap it or really do a much more fundamental rethink. So it can happen in any process, but the goal is to actually like get those learnings as early as possible, so that when you've actually invested all the time and everything, you're not finding out that there's this huge blind spot. So
That's great. A lot of
but
feedback
but
in
real life doesn't always work that way. So even with the best intentions.
Just to go back to the tools that are used, the engines, the software. Mary, who I think is a teacher out there, is really trying to push her students to take a fresh look at 2D and the 3D mix. And Mary asks, the 2D that you mentioned using VR to animate, what was that? And was it imported in from something like Toon Boom?
It's interesting. That was actually done as traditional hand drawn, but we work with, like we work with storyboard artists. We for example, for our TV show we're doing with Disney Plus, we do a full storyboard animatic with many iterations of, let's say, the pilot episode, and so we do actually use Toon Boom for that. I would say, because we've actually been developing tools. Toon Boom is from an engine. I'm an engineer, so from an engineering perspective, Toon Boom is kind of like frozen in time from like 20 years ago. And so I just feel really bad for all the storyboard artists that are using Toon Boom, because it, like, the system's not very extensible, and so one of the I have seen more recently, one of our storyboard artists was working on a show where they were using Blender and some of the grease pencil tools, and they develop workflows there. And then you're getting a lot more of the tools, especially when you talk about mixing 2D and 3D. So given what I know about Toon Boom, I would love to see those types of workflows more, because it would allow us to do a lot more in terms of helping artists out. We have at our studio tried to develop tools, and it's very limiting in Toon Boom. That being said, it's like the de facto standard for doing, like 2D storyboarding. I think less so for animation though. So like um I don't know how easy it would be to do a full animation. I imagine not very easy. So for storyboarding, Toon Boom is still standard, but I think Blender especially has a lot of great 2D tools. So I think that could definitely be a good workflow.
Definitely. I will say, I mean,
I
I
think
can't speak
but I
to
forgot to say, just to not, I don't want to diss. Harmony is actually like the 2D. Sorry, I was thinking of Storyboard Pro. Harmony is this traditional 2D, and that most most animation studios use. So
the
sorry,
only thing
I
I was
was
going to
only
add
thinking about
there
Storyboard
for
Pro because that's what we've been dealing with. But yes,
definitely, the
Harmony
only
is
thing I was
widely
going to
used
add in
within
there
industry.
for Mary was that I believe even Storyboard Pro from Toon Boom are working on integrating 3D elements.
Yeah, they are.
So like placing objects, CG objects to move around your camera in a 3D space is definitely a new
Yeah,
capability of
and
theirs. I
they've
would
also
look into
just
that.
started to, in beta, have generative AI things, which was one of the things we were trying to integrate. So we'll see where that goes, but maybe that will help out. But yeah, I'm sorry, I was so focused on Storyboard Pro that I forgot all about your question. Is really more about Harmony.
There's a lot out there.
Yes.
We've got an anonymous attendee who asks, do you guys at Baobab offer trainee/apprenticeships for new grads?
We do actually. So we have a strong belief in internships at our studio. So if you're interested, you can you can certainly reach out to me. Um, um, and yeah, but that's definitely something we've had interns in all facets of our company, depending on the timing and stuff. So
Great. Thanks for offering, Larry.
yeah.
There's a question in the chat from Mia who asks, as someone who is not very well skilled in any of the process of making their own independent 2D animated film, is there a point where it is taking too long to make a short animation/scene?
But it's funny you should mention that, because I get hounded every day almost, that like creating animated content historically is really, really slow and hard, and it takes a really long time, and it's super laborious and painstaking, and what is interesting is that there's a big desire for that to change, and it is changing, just because you have short form content that's coming out where like the cadence of the animated content needs to be much faster and looser. And then there's also, I mean, we've just been playing around this as well, but there's definitely, obviously, with a lot of these generative video models, there is the ability to build a pipeline that supports it's still not quite ready for prime time, but that really supports, going, typing in what you want, providing imagery, and creating something, which is still pretty impressive. It's very hard to direct, and it doesn't do very well with multiple characters, nuanced performance, or any type of fast motion. So there's lots of limitations, but at the same time, if like that is also something to experiment with, like that technology is changing a lot and is likely going to augment, like how fast we can actually, if nothing else, prototype things.
Great. All right. Well, I know we're right at time. So Larry, I want to thank you for participating in our speaker series. It was great to learn about the process at Baobab, the pipeline that you use to blend animation and gaming into indie animated projects. So thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us today. It was great to hear your questions. And I hope you can catch us for the next one in 2 weeks.
All right. Thanks everyone for attending.
Thanks all. Bye.